Disclaimer: there may be some pauses and mispronunciations. Also, it has been a long time since we've read a book longer than a children's book, and we're not used to reading long books aloud. So our reading skills may not be too good in this video. We may stumble over words and have to reread sentences. Please be patient with us as we read this book to you. We hope that we improve as this series progresses. Thank you for understanding.
The Moonarayde system.
Enjoy the video.
The Moonarayde system presents Loving Jenna by Amy Lillard. Loving Jenna by Amy Lillard. Chapter 1. Jenna Burkhart looked past the rows of prayer coverings to the sea of faces in the room. None were familiar. She didn't recognize any of the ladies in front of her, but she could only see the back of their heads. And none of the men staring at her from across the room were known to her either. They weren't exactly staring, but it felt like it. Everyone wanted to look at the new people, which this time was her family. Her mom, and her mommy. She hadn't wanted to come to church today. They had only been in town a couple of weeks, and she thought it would be best for them to skip. God would understand, but her mother wouldn't hear of it. And Mommy went along. She always did. Jenna had begged. Her mother had told her that she needed church. Jenna had pleaded with Mom to let her stay home by herself. But her mother told her that she wasn't allowed to be home alone. She had claimed her apron had a stain on it, too big to ignore, and her newest, cleanest, whitest prayer covering was smudged. How could she worship God all dirty like that? Her mother had told her to stop making up stories. She only wanted to stay home because she didn't like change. But once she went to church a couple of times, it wouldn't be a change. It would be what was normal. So now, here she sat at church, in someone's house she didn't know, listening to a preacher she hadn't met. And people were staring at her. She didn't like when people stared. Back home, things were different. Everyone knew about her and her condition. No one would ask questions that she didn't know how to answer. No one would want to know the story. Everyone had already heard it, about how she almost drowned, how she did drown, she supposed. She and a group of friends had gone swimming in the creek, the same creek she had been swimming in her whole life. Then the accident happened. They said she wasn't breathing when they pulled her from the water, but one of the group she was with knew CPR. He was older and wanted to be a volunteer EMT, but Jenna wasn't sure if he ever got to be. His family had moved away not long after. She was able to tell him thanks. but just barely. She was 12 at the time, but she had been blessed that day. Mommy always told her that, and Jenna supposed that was true too. She really didn't remember. She only knew what she knew because everyone had told her. She had jumped off the bank of the creek into the water, then hit her head on something at the bottom. Most believed it to be a rock, and said so often how it was a wonder that she hadn't broken her neck and gone on to her reward. But she hadn't. She had just stayed under the water too long. The oxygen was cut off to her brain. That's what the doctors all said. And because of that, she would never be the same again. She felt the same, but she could remember sometimes when she was younger, when she had felt a little different, like she was normal. She went to school with the normal kids and talked about boys and reading books and what they would do when they finally got to run around. But she never got to run around. Now her mother said she was special and therefore couldn't do those things like the other kids. She hadn't called them normal, but Jenna knew what she meant. Other meant normal or special, depended on who was talking. She glanced down to her left, where her grandmother sat. Mommy had her hands folded in her lap, age-wrinkled hands that had seen a lot, had helped pull Jenna into this world, but her grandmother wasn't that old, she supposed. 60-something, maybe. They really didn't talk about such things, unless to say, "Jenna, you are 20 years old," followed by whatever they wanted her to stop doing or start doing, depended. Her mother sat on her right, hands folded in much the same manner as her grandmother. Mommy wasn't Mom's mom. She almost snickered at the thought, but knew Mom would disapprove. Mommy was her dad's mom. He had passed a few years before, so here they were, all Burkharts, all new to this town called Wells Landing. Jenna had never wanted to move here, but neither her grandmother or her mother had bothered to ask her. They had simply come in one day and announced that it was time to start over. Actually, Mom had done the announcing. Mommy had just gone along. Jenna had protested that she didn't want to start over. She didn't see the need. Seemed to her that she started over 8 years ago when she had been brought back from the brink of death. Mom brushed away all her arguments as if they were nothing more than pesky flies. Then her voice took on the tone that Jenna hated. It always made her feel like she was dumber than everyone else. Maybe even dumber than she had been before the accident. But she would never say as much. Mom just went on about how she and Mommy knew what was best for the family. though all the decisions were Mom's, and how Jenna needed not to worry about such matters. The two of them would take care of life's hard decisions, and Jenna need not concern herself. But she was concerned, and no one cared. That's how she found herself in a strange person's home, having church, surrounded by people she had never met. She would never be able to remember everyone's name. She would never be able to make friends. How was she supposed to make friends with people who hadn't known her before the accident? Who didn't know that she had been a different person, but that she was still Jenna? How? The congregation stood. That was one good thing about it. She supposed she might not know anyone there but Mom and Mommy, but for the most part, church was just the same. Announcements were at the same time, songs at the same time, preaching, prayer, and release. It all happened in a so familiar rhythm that eased her nerves. She wouldn't make friends, but God was still the same. After the final prayer, Jenna followed Mom and Mommy outside with the other women in the congregation. As usual, the men would set up the church benches and turn them into tables and seats so everyone could enjoy the after-church meal. The men first, then the women and children. Once again, there was comfort in the certainty of tradition. The same food was served here as was served in Kansas. The women wore the same kind of prayer coverings. Jenna had once commented that they looked a little like paper funnels on the backs of their heads, but her mom had fussed at her, but good. She told Jenna how disrespectful she was being, and made her say extra prayers to ask the Lord's forgiveness. Jenna hadn't meant to be disrespectful. Just sometimes the things that came into her mind were coming out of her mouth before she had a chance to think them over. Most times it was okay. Her thoughts were usually happy ones. But other times, like the prayer coverings, Mom had gotten so upset that to this day, Jenna still prayed for the Lord to lead her path straight. It had been nearly 8 years since she had made the mistake. 8 years, and it still weighed heavily on her heart and in her thoughts. Jenna Gale, her mother nudged her with one elbow, pulling Jenna from her thoughts. No wool gathering. We've got a church to feed. Get the package of cups and follow me. A familiar woman swooped in and grabbed the cups before Jenna could even blink. She had seen her before. Blonde hair, pale blue eyes, much like Jenna herself. But Jenna thought hard. Even though she knew her mother would think that she was wool gathering. It was a saying. It meant daydreaming, not really gathering wool. Think, Jenna. She set her mind back to remembering. Helen. That was the woman's name, and she was the bishop's wife. Jenna had met her at the at the quilting circle meeting on Tuesday. "Jenna Gale," Mom called. "Coming." She picked up a stack of paper plates to feel useful and went to stand next to her mother. If they were going to have to stay in Oklahoma, she might as well start trying to like it. Or the people. Not that she thought she ever would. And maybe one day, when she was grown enough, she would go back to Kansas and live, maybe even by herself. It was a thrilling thought, though she knew it would never happen. Mom told her often that she wasn't like the other girls. She would never be like the other girls. She was simple in the brain, but also had simple needs, and she would live with Mom and Mommy for the rest of her life. Jenna loved her mom and her mommy, and she supposed that if it was God's will that she had the accident that caused her to be simple in the brain and only have simple needs, then it was also God's will that she live with her mom forever. She was an angel. He was sure of it. Buddy Miller stared at the girl he had never seen before. She was all the way across the yard, and still he had noticed her. He couldn't take his eyes off her. She was beautiful like an angel. She had to be one. Just had to. Buddy wasn't his real name, though. Buddy wasn't his real name, though that's what everyone called him. His real name was Ivan Dale Miller. It was a good name, so he never understood why he ended up with a nickname. But the Amish people seemed to like to call others by names not given to them at birth, like Bacon Dan and Baby Holly, whose real name was Hollis. He was the Andrew Fitch's boy. The girl stood on the far side of the yard, next to Helen Ebersole, the bishop's wife, and another woman he didn't know. There was a golden glow about the girl's shoulders, and even from the distance, Buddy could see her eyes were. Even from this distance, Buddy could see her eyes were as blue as the sky on a perfect summer day. He tugged on his brother's elbow. Jonah was married now and had a baby, but he still hung out with Buddy after church. He had promised after he and Sarah got married that he would always be Buddy's best friend, and so far Jonah had lived up to his word. "What is it?" Jonah turned his attention away from the group of men gathered at one end of the pasture. They were at the Fitches today. Buddy loved when church was at the Fitches. Andrew Fitch had a beautiful farm and kept horses for other people. He also bred some of his own. That's when a farmer made 2 horses have a colt. That's what a baby horse was called. Buddy knew He had a notebook where he wrote down everything he wanted to remember. A long time ago, he had written all that in his notebook, and he hadn't forgotten it. Since then, he had come out with Jonah a couple of times to help Andrew with birthings. It was messy business, but that was just part of being a farmer. A fact of life, Jonah called it. Her. Buddy pointed to the girl across the yard. I've never seen her before. Is she an angel? Jonah laughed, but Buddy knew that he wasn't laughing at him. Jonah would never laugh at him. It's just the way the sunlight is surrounding her, he explained. But Buddy wasn't convinced. She sure looked like an angel to him. What he could see of her hair was as golden as the sun, and he had never ever seen her before. He didn't know any angels either. What do you think, Buddy? Reluctantly, he pulled his attention away from the girl and back to the men he stood with. They were all Jonah's friends, but Jonah told him they were his friends too. They liked Buddy, though they weren't like him. Buddy was special. Well, that's what his mom said. He wasn't exactly sure what that meant. He wasn't special. Ice cream in the afternoon was special. The chocolate cake with mint frosting at Esther's bakery was special. Ivy Weaver had told him so, though Ivy's last name was Brennanman now, and she had moved away with her grandfather and her husband Zeb. Before she left, she had told him it was special, and that's why they only made it at Christmas time. Buddy wasn't like ice cream in the afternoon, and he was around for every season, so he couldn't really be special even if he wasn't like everyone else. Huh? Jonah chuckled again. Caught you looking at the girls. No, Buddy shook his head. I was just looking at her. Just the one girl. The prettiest girl he had ever seen. What do you think about the horse? Jonah asked again. He still wore a big smile, and Buddy knew that he must have found something. Buddy said he must have found something Buddy said funny, because Jonah would never laugh at him. He's beautiful, and he was. The beast was a paint horse. That's what Buddy thought they called them. He was white and brown, like swirls in the ice cream he liked. He was strong and solid, and knew of his beauty as he pranced around the corral, showing off for them. Paint horse. That was something else he had written down in his notebook. He knew it. He knows it. A vain horse? Andrew said. Andrew was married to Caroline, baby Holly's mother. She had just had a new baby late last year, so baby Holly had just become Holly. Buddy thought it was a strange name since Holly was a plant. It seemed better suited for girls like the brown-haired Holly who worked at the grocery store in town. She was English. He's proud, Buddy said decisively. You know what the Bible says about pride, Danny Fitch said. He was Andrew's cousin. Does that count for horses? Buddy had never given it any thought, and it wasn't something he wanted to think about now. He wanted to look back and see if the girl was still standing there, or if she had disappeared like he supposed an angel would. His gaze trailed back across the yard. She was still there, though the sun had shifted, and she no longer looked like an angel with the light pouring out of every bit of her. But she was still just as beautiful, maybe even more so, because now she looked like someone he could go up and talk to. Not that he would. He was different, not normal, not like Jonah and Danny and Andrew. Girls liked them. At least they had before the three men settled down to family living. That's what Jonah called it. No, Buddy wasn't the same, even if he didn't like it when his mother called him special. He hadn't gone to a special school, but no one else there had looked like him. He didn't wear special shirts or a special hat, and there was nothing about him that would be considered special. But he wouldn't go talk to the girl. She was probably just visiting anyway, even if she wasn't from heaven. Why don't you invite her to the singing tonight? Jonah asked. Buddy shook his head. I'm not going. You haven't been in a while now. Jonah stopped hitching up his horse to give Buddy a direct look. Buddy shrugged. It's not much fun without you there. What about a girlfriend? Jonah went back to his work. Church was over, eating was over, and everyone was getting ready to go home. All the youth were getting ready to have a singing. Buddy wouldn't go. He wasn't really young anymore, and he had joined the church, so he wasn't running around. What else was there to do at a singing except find a wife? And that wasn't something he had ever let himself think about. Buddy felt the heat rise into his face. He was probably pink like the petunias his mother planted each spring. I don't have a girlfriend. And how are you going to get one if you don't go to the singing? I don't know, he mumbled. Won't I guess? Jonah finished his task and slapped his horse on the rump. That's what I mean. You should invite the new girl. Get a leg up. Buddy didn't answer. He wasn't sure what his legs had to do with anything. But more than that, Jonah wouldn't understand. He might be the best brother in the whole world, but he didn't know what it was like to be Buddy. Buddy didn't want to say what he had known for some time now. He didn't like to be called special, but he knew he was different. He wasn't as smart as everyone else. The only other person he knew like him was James Surreal, but James was different. He found a woman and married before he became special. Buddy had been this way his entire life, and girls had never liked him before. Why would this one be any different? She would be smart like the teacher and his brothers and sisters. She would want someone smart like her. She might be as pretty as an angel, the prettiest girl he had ever seen, but she wouldn't feel the same. She wouldn't want to be his girlfriend because he wasn't like everyone else. They didn't know it, but he heard his parents talk when they thought he wasn't around, or maybe that he couldn't hear them. They talked about how he would always live on the farm, how they hoped that Jonathan, his younger brother, would take care of him as he grew older. It had never bothered Buddy before, but now, for some reason, it did. It did bother him in a way that left him wanting. For what? He had no idea, but it was still there. This big hole inside him that needed something. Maybe I should get me a dog. Jonah laughed and clapped him on the shoulder, much like he had done to his horse. What? Buddy asked. Nothing, Jonah said. But he thought his brother wasn't telling him the truth. Obie's got some good ones, and Gabe Allen Lambert is making dog houses now. I could get a dog and get that dog a house, and show mom and dad that he could take care of something, and maybe then they would know that he would be able to take care of himself, and they wouldn't talk about him when they thought he couldn't hear. But he didn't know why that felt important. It just did. Ja, Jonah said. I'll go over there with you if you want. Sure. Buddy grinned, happy to be back on what felt like familiar ground with his brother. But what about the singing? I'll go, I guess. Will you invite the girl? He shook his head. I wouldn't want her to think it means something that it doesn't. Besides, now that he had plans to get a dog, why would he need a girlfriend? Chapter 2. Singings are stupid. Jenna wanted to shout those words at the top of her lungs, but her mother would say she was having a fit and make her go anyway. Out of principle. Whatever that meant. When her mother said that, Jenna knew to give up. Her mother was going to win the argument, and she should just settle herself to making the best of the situation. Are you ready? Rose Ebersole smiled at her, and Jenna tried to return it. 2 of the bishop's daughters had promised to stay with her at the singing and help her meet people. Mom had readily agreed. Now they were standing outside the barn at the Fitches, where today's church service had been held. Jenna had made a point to memorize the name, but she couldn't remember who the Fitches were. She had simply been introduced to too many members of the community in one day. She would have to work on that another time. Of course she's ready. Susanna Ebersole tucked Jenna's arm through her own and patted her hand. Stay with me. I know how to have a good time at these things. Rose rolled her eyes at her sister. Don't pay any attention to her. She'll get you into trouble. Susanna smiled, but didn't bother to deny her sister's words. But you'll have a good time. Jenna tried to smile once more. She didn't want to have a good time. She didn't want to go. But her mother said she needed to meet people her own age. Like anyone there would be her age. She turned 20 on her last birthday, and she might not know a lot of things, but she knew that by 20, most of her friends back home were already married and having babies, and that was something she didn't think she would ever get to do. Not because she wasn't a good person or she wasn't pretty enough to have a suitor. She wasn't smart. She knew it. She had heard people talking about it when they thought she couldn't hear. My brain is simple, she wanted to tell them, but my hearing is fine. And when they talked, these people would say, "What a shame it was. She's such a pretty girl." Then they would shake their heads and make that sound people made when they sucked on their teeth. Such a shame. She supposed it was a little. Once she had been smart like everyone else, Her brain hadn't been made simple yet, but long ago she had accepted that her different brain and different way of thinking were part of God's plan. Sometimes God's will was a shame, like hurricanes and those big waves they had on the other side of the world. And sometimes it was a blessing. Now that she was changed after her accident, she wasn't sure which to call it. For now, she was neutral. That meant she wasn't picking a side. She was right in the middle. Susanna patted her hand again. Don't worry, I won't let her bore you to death. Jenna was about to tell the girl that she didn't think that was possible when Susanna dragged her into the barn. It had already been set up for the singing. The church benches faced each other in rows and rows, much like church itself. The boys had already started to gather on one side and the girls on the other. Jenna had been to a singing before, though it had been a while. She didn't like them. She had waited her whole life to turn 16 and start running around. She and her friends had talked about it as young as 10 years old, especially those with older brothers and sisters who were already in Rumspringa. Even after the accident, she had been excited at the prospect. Then she actually went to a singing, and it wasn't anything like she expected. Or maybe it was. The boys were looking at the girls, wondering which one of them they would marry. And the girls were looking at the boys, wondering which one of them they would marry. But nobody had been looking at Jenna. She had cried when she went home. She couldn't deny the evidence that she was different any longer. It had been easier before, especially after she finished school. She spent 2 years learning how to cook and clean and take care of a house. To do that, she needed to be home. So she had tucked herself away, only getting out for occasional trips to town for groceries and such, and to go to church every other week. If she wasn't around other people, it wasn't so noticeable that she was different. But at the first singing, it was so obvious. She was different. Pretty, but not smart. Simple Jenna. Our sister's father-in-law has brain damage, Susanna said, as they moved around the benches to find the best seat. Susanna. Rose's voice was filled with scolding. Well, he does. But you shouldn't go around telling people that. Susanna frowned. Why not? It's the truth. And I wanted Jenna to know that she wasn't the only one here. Susanna. Rose pinched her sister on the arm. Ow! Susanna cried. What did you do that for? You shouldn't say such things. Rose popped her hands on her hips, her cheeks the same color as her name. She knows she's... Susanna didn't get to finish. Rose pinched her again. Stop doing that. Then stop talking so much. Jenna sighed. I can hear you. Both girls turned to her, their expressions painted with embarrassment and distress. I'm sorry, Rose started. Me too, Susanna said. It's okay. Jenna didn't want to hear what their intentions were. She knew they meant well. Everyone always meant well. Let's start over, Susanna suggested. Yeah, Rose agreed. What choice did Jenna have but to go along? She nodded her consent, and the three of them found seats. The girls sat on either side of her and talked across her the whole time as they waited for the singing to begin. They talked about this boy's shirt and that boy's suspenders. They talked about this girl's hair and that girl's dress. But Jenna had no idea who any of them were. Would you look there? Rose said. She was too polite to point and instead nodded her head in the direction she wanted them to look. Oh my! Susanna exclaimed. Then she nudged Jenna in the rib with her elbow. That's Buddy Miller. Okay, Jenna said. No, Susanna continued. It's not just okay. He's like you. Well, kind of. Jenna barely got out of the way before Rose reached across her to pinch her sister. But Susanna was too fast and snatched her arm away before her sister could grab any skin. That was a free one, she said. Pinch me again, and I'm telling Mom. Tell her. Rose's voice was full of challenge. And I'll tell her a few things of my own. The sisters sat back in place, facing front. The singing was about to start. Who's Buddy Miller? She hadn't meant to ask. Why did she even need to know? That boy on the right. And that boy right there in the front, next to Jonathan Miller, Susanna said. She doesn't know who Jonathan Miller is. Right, yeah. Susanna thought about it for a second. He's wearing a blue shirt. Rose shook her head. Most of the boys over there are wearing blue shirts. It was true. These boys, like the ones back home, seemed to prefer blue above any other acceptable color. Third from the left, Rose said, right there. And that's where she saw him. He looked different than anyone she had ever seen. Not bad, just different. Shaggy blonde hair, as if he couldn't sit still long enough for anyone to cut it all at one time. It was blonde, but different than her own. Darker, thicker. His hair looked like stalks of wheat ready for harvest. His face was broad, his eyes deep set. They turned up a bit at the corners, giving him an unusual look. Exotic, she thought some people said, though she wasn't 100% sure that's what it was called. His eyes were brown, but not ordinary. They looked like the root beer candy she used to get at the meat market when she lived in Kansas. He was handsome in his own way, she decided. But how was he like her? He's got Down syndrome, Susanna said importantly. Susanna, Rosa admonished. What? I can't say that either. What's that? Jenna asked. Not sure really. Susanna paused to think about it a little more. Rose took the opportunity to jump back into the conversation. It makes him not quite as smart as other people, when it comes to school and things like that. Like me. Jenna sat up a little straighter in her spot and pointed a thumb at her own chest. He's plenty smart in other ways, Susanna cut back in. He's good with animals, and he helps his dad on the farm, and he's a real good baseball player. I can do that, Jenna said. Not farm, but I can cook and clean, though I don't really play baseball. It doesn't matter. You two can still be friends, Susanna assured her. Does he want to be friends? Of course he does, Susanna said as Rose replied. We'll have to go ask. Jenna shook her head. I don't want to ask him. But, Susanna said. Time to sing, Rose interrupted. A boy Jenna had been introduced to earlier stood in the middle of the benches between the girls and the boys. She might have been introduced to him, but she couldn't remember his name. Not that it mattered. He would probably never talk to her, like all the other boys. He liked smart girls, smarter anyway. But it was all God's plan, she told herself, and that's the way it was supposed to be. What's her name? Buddy couldn't help himself. He said he wasn't going to worry about who she was or why she was in Wells Landing. Even if she was staying, it wasn't like they could be friends. Buddy had enough of those. He managed not to say anything while they were singing, and they sang and sang, for it seemed like hours. Now everyone was drinking Kool-Aid and getting ready to go home. Buddy pushed the thoughts of having a girlfriend of his own to the back of his mind. For some reason, every time he put them away, they came back again, a little quicker each time, as if to tease him with their message. Some things were just better if accepted early on and dealt with when they came up. He knew Jonah had told him, and Jonah was real smart like the girl across the room. Who? Jonathan asked. He had to take his gaze from Susanna Ebersol. The girl sitting with the one you're moony-eyed over. I'm not moony-eyed over Susanna Ebersol. Ah, Buddy said. He raised one finger and grinned at his brother. You were looking at her. Jonathan shrugged, as if it didn't matter, but it did. Buddy knew it did. Maybe I was. I still don't know who the girl is. Buddy watched her. She moved easy, as if every step was already planned. She never stumbled, graceful like the swans in that special pond over in Tulsa. He had been to see them a couple of times. He liked animals, but those birds glided through the water like it was nothing. That's how she walked. That's how he knew she was smart. She didn't have to worry about things. Her mother didn't hover over her Her mother didn't talk about her when she thought she couldn't hear. Not like Buddy's mom. If you like her, go talk to her. Jonathan clapped him on the shoulder, bringing him out of his thoughts. No, Buddy said, shrugging off his brother's hand. And now she probably doesn't live here. Wouldn't make any difference. No, probably not a good idea. You won't know any of that. You won't know any of that until you talk to her. Buddy looked across the room. The blonde-haired girl was staring back at him. He started to look away, but he couldn't. Susanna leaned close to her and whispered something in her ear. The girl nodded. Then she raised one hand and waved at him. At him? I think she likes you, Jonathan said in a low voice. It was almost a whisper, but Buddy could still hear the smile in it. No, he said. She doesn't like me. Jonathan nudged him toward the three girls. Susanna and Rose Ebersole were standing on each side of her. And you will talk to Susanna? Buddy asked. Jonathan turned the same color as the pickled beets Mom served with supper. Yeah, I guess so. Buddy wouldn't have had the courage to walk across the room for the only purpose of talking to a girl if he hadn't had his brother at his side. Had it been Jonah, it might not have taken him so long to decide to walk over, but that was just Jonah. Somehow he knew what to say to Buddy to get him to understand. It wasn't that Buddy loved Jonathan any less, but Buddy simply had a closer relationship with Jonah. He missed him. He and Sarah and their sweet baby girl lived way across town, far enough that Dad said Buddy couldn't drive the tractor there when he was by himself. That meant he had to wait for someone else to want to visit his brother before he could go. Buddy hated that. Hi, Susanna waved at them as they approached. That was Susanna. She was fun and outgoing, never bashful or shy, like Buddy could be at times. He didn't want to be bashful, but it was like a different part of him rose up inside and took over. When that happened, he pulled away from everyone, and he wasn't able to talk. Thankfully, that didn't happen much. Hi, Jonathan's voice cracked, and he cleared his throat. Hi, he said, this time a little deeper. What are you doing over here, Jonathan? Jonathan Miller. Rose propped her hands on her hips and stared at Buddy's brother. Normally Rose was mild-mannered and sweet, but for some reason, here lately, she was not. Just came to say hi. Jonathan shifted in place, but dropped his gaze to his feet. It was a sure sign that he liked Susanna Ebersol, but he wasn't ready to tell her yet. He had liked her for so long, and it seemed to Buddy that he wasn't about to miss his chance, especially with Rudy Dawn coming up from the other side. Hi, girls. Rudy Dawn Lambright walked up like they should be thankful he had come by. Buddy liked Rudy Dawn. Good enough. Luke's brother was handsome and good at everything. He had big dimples and bright blue eyes, like the pictures of the ocean he had seen in the window of the travel agent's office in town. But the thing was, all the girls liked Rudy Dawn, all of them. He would have his pick once he decided to court. And now that he was here, Buddy was sunk. There was no way the girls would talk to him, or even Jonathan, when Rudy Dawn was around. He looked at the girl across from him. She hadn't said anything since they had walked up. She hadn't even said hi to Rudy Dawn. And when she did, this might be the only chance he got to say his piece. I think you're pretty. The other girls around them had been talking, but they stopped now to stare at him. And the girl, he still didn't know her name. That's all. He turned as embarrassment took hold of him. He had wanted to meet her, find out her name, and instead he told her she was pretty and walked away. Like that was going to get him anywhere. He nearly stumbled in his haste to get as far away from them as possible. At least he was one step ahead of Jonathan. He had told the girl how he felt. Maybe one day he'd find a girl who could say the same things back to him. Maybe. But as Lori always said, don't hold your breath. Buddy wasn't 100% sure what that meant, but he thought it had something to do with not getting the thing it was that you wanted. Plus, if you hold your breath, you would turn kind of a blue color and pass out. Buddy knew he had done that one. Buddy knew he had done that one time. He paused at the entrance to the barn. His mother would skin him alive if he went too far without his brother. She wouldn't really skin him. It was just a saying to let people know that she would be really, really mad. And she would be almost as mad as she would be if she found out that he had told a girl she was pretty, and he'd said it loud enough that everyone around heard. Word would get back to her soon enough, and he would have to explain something he didn't quite understand himself. Wait, He stopped and looked down at the small white fingers touching his sleeve, as if she had only then realized that she had touched him. She drew back. Buddy looked at the place where her hand had been, even though it was no longer there. Had he imagined her touch? Then he looked up into those angelic blue eyes. His stomach dropped, like that time at the fair when he'd ridden on the big wooden roller coaster, the one that used to be in Tulsa but wasn't there anymore. "What?" he asked. It was all he could gather the courage to say. "You think I'm pretty?" He studied her face, not to look at her again, but to see what she needed from him. She wanted to know if he thought she was pretty. But why? He saw no teasing in her expression, no demand in her eyes, but it looked like there was a trace of a longing, maybe. He wasn't sure. "Yeah," he said with a nod. "I think you're very pretty." What was the saying his grandmother was always going around quoting to them? In for a penny, in for a pound. That meant don't do it halfway. If you're going to tell a girl she's pretty, you go all in. Of course, now he wished that he hadn't said anything to her of the sort. But now that the words were out there, maybe even the prettiest girl I've ever seen. She turned a sweet shade of pink, like the iced cookies Esther and Caroline had at the bakery for Valentine's Day. "I'm not sure what to say. My mom says when someone pays you a compliment, you should say thank you." "You're right, of course. Thank you." She paused, frowned. "I don't even know your name." "Ivan Dale Miller," he said proudly. He was named after his grandfather, and was secretly proud that he carried the name, but everybody calls me Buddy. She smiled. She had dimples, not too big, not too small, just beautiful dimples on either side of her mouth. "Nice to meet you, Ivan Dale Miller. What's your name?" he asked. "Jennifer Abigail Burkhart. Everyone but my mom calls me Jenna." "What does your mom call you?" "Jenna Gale." Buddy thought about it a second. "I like Jenna," he finally said. She smiled again. "Me too. That's what my dad wanted to name me." Buddy nodded, then shifted as suddenly. He had run out of anything to say. He could tell her that he was named after his grandfather, but who cared about that other than him? No one, according to his brother Aaron. And he told her she was pretty and found out her name. He wanted to stay, but how dumb would it be to stand there and say nothing? "Okay then, bye." He waved and turned back to back to the milling crowd of teenagers and went looking for his brother. "What just happened?" Susanna asked when she had arrived at Jenna's side. Jenna was Jenna was watching the place where Buddy Ivan Dale Miller had disappeared. He thought she was pretty. Why did that mean so much to her? She didn't know. Maybe because he said it and hadn't talked about what a shame it all was. Such a pretty girl. A boy just told me that I'm pretty. Just saying that once again brought a fresh heat to her cheeks. She wished she had something to fan herself with. She would use the tail end of her apron, but if that got back to her mom, she would never hear the end of it, which meant her mother would fuss at her for days and days about how to behave in public. So she didn't. "You are pretty." Rose picked that time to come up. She said the words with such certainty that Jenna wanted to believe them. Jenna wanted to believe there was some truth in them, but it still wasn't as thrilling as when Buddy had said the same thing to her. Buddy, she liked the name. She decided it fit him. Ivan Dale was a fine name, but it wasn't as approachable as Buddy. A guy named Buddy would be friends with everyone, would tell girls that they were pretty. He would be fun to hang around, and even more fun to know. Yeah, she thought she might really come to like a boy named Buddy. "What's wrong?" Susanna asked, tugging on one of Jenna's arms. "Nothing." "You're frowning." Rose's eyes lifted in what Jenna thought was a questioning manner. "Sometimes I do that when I'm thinking." "You must be thinking really hard," Susanna commented. Jenna shrugged. I suppose. She didn't want to tell them what she had been thinking about. How much she liked Buddy Miller. Maybe more than she had liked anyone in a long, long time. Because if she told them that, they would tell their sister Emily. She was in the quilting circle Jenna had heard her mother talking about. If she told Rose and Susanna that she liked Buddy Miller, her mother would find out before the following Tuesday, if not before. But at Tuesday's quilting meeting, for certain, that's the way small communities worked. "Well, quit all that hard thinking." Susanna slipped her arm around Jenna and steered her back to the crowd of teens standing around in the barn. "It's time to have fun."
Chapter 3.
Chapter 3. "What's Down syndrome?" Jenna asked on Tuesday. She and Mom were remaking the bed after washing the sheets and hanging them out to dry. That was one thing about Oklahoma. It seemed to be better It seemed to be hotter, quicker there than it did in Kansas. And that was definitely good when it came to hanging out laundry. It's a condition that makes people a little slower, I suppose, is the best way to say it. Mom snapped the sheet in the air above the mattress and started smoothing out the ends. It was the fitted one that covered tight, and Jenna grabbed her corner and pulled. Buddy Miller hadn't seemed slower to her. He had seemed nice. And maybe that was another part of Down syndrome. Why? Jenna shrugged and moved to the next corner. I don't know. She hadn't meant to talk to her mother about it, but she wasn't sure. But she wasn't sure she would be able to go into town to the library and find out for herself. She had looked in all the books they had downstairs. The encyclopedia wasn't much help. It talked about chromo somethings and a bunch of other things that she didn't understand. There was a boy at the singing with it. Mom nodded, but thankfully kept on making the bed, as if the question Jenna was asking wasn't extremely important. It might not be to her, but it sure was to Jenna. I saw him at church. Gertie Miller's son. Jenna and Buddy hadn't gotten around to talking about their mothers and mothers' names, so she wasn't sure about that at all. It made me wonder what it is. This time, Mom did stop. She looked up at Jenna. The flat sheet still folded in her arms. Jennifer Abigail. She never called her Jenna that. Only when she was in big trouble. I just wanted to know, Jenna mumbled with a shrug. Do you want people discussing you when you aren't around? No, Mom. Her mother snapped the sheet into place, but didn't wait for Jenna before smoothing it. That boy has enough trials in his life. He doesn't need you making things worse for him. Jenna had no idea why asking about his condition and wanting to learn about it would make anything worse for him, but she didn't argue. Yes, Mom, she said, and pulled the sheet over the side of the bed. You sure about this? Jonah pulled his tractor to a stop, but waited for Buddy's answer. With the engine still running. Yep. Buddy jumped to the ground and stretched his legs. His mom said he did that when he was nervous. But he wasn't nervous. He was excited. He was going to get a puppy. It had been 4 days since he had made the decision. He wanted to come on Monday, but his mom told him to sleep on it. It was a saying that meant he should give it more thought. All that was in his notebook, but he didn't need to think about it more. He knew what he wanted. He wanted a puppy, a dog to call his own. He was grown now, a man, and a man should have a dog. Obie Brenneman came around the side of the house just as Jonah was climbing down from the tractor seat. That was one thing Buddy liked about his Amish home. Unlike some of the other ones he had heard about, they got to drive tractors Monday through Saturday. Every day but Sunday. That's when they drove their buggies to church and for visiting. He'd heard people talk and had learned that most Amish people only drove horses and carriages to get where they wanted to go all the time. It might be a good thing, seeing as how mom and dad would let him drive the buggy, but not the tractor. And that was something he never understood. He was a grown man, about to get his very own dog. He should be allowed to drive the tractor. One thing at a time. He'd get his dog, show his parents how he could take care of it. Then he would ask about the tractor. They might not think he could do all the things that other men did, but he knew he could. He just knew it. Hey, Obie smiled as he grew near. Buddy had always liked Obie, short for Obadiah. He was a lot like Buddy in that he loved animals. All animals. He raised golden retriever puppies, and Gabe Allen Lambert could build them fancy English houses to live in. That was the next thing Buddy wanted to get. A fancy house for his dog that would really show his mom and dad that he was ready for responsibility. Hey, Obie. Buddy reached out to shake his hand. Wasn't that what men did when they started to conduct business? Obie didn't hesitate. He clasped Buddy's hand in his own and gave it a firm shake. I hear you are in the market for a dog. Buddy frowned. Surely that was just another one of those sayings, but it wasn't in his notebook. He had come here to get a dog, not the market. He is, Jonah answered for him. Normally he didn't care when people talked for him, but today it bothered him. I can talk for myself. He tried to whisper the words so only Jonah could hear, but Obie covered his mouth with one hand. Buddy figured it was to hide his smile. What was worse, being laughed at or talked about? He hadn't decided. He pushed his anger down, something he had learned to do when when he started school and fixed his attention on Obi. Yeah, I'm in the market to get a dog. He wasn't sure he said that right, but neither man corrected him. Come on into the barn. I'll show you what we have. He turned and hooked onto He turned and hooked one arm over his shoulders. Buddy looked back at Jonah, who nodded. Then they followed after Obi Brenneman. The interior of the barn was dim and cool. Little slats of light seeped in through the cracks between the boards, a sure sign that this barn was used for hay and not regular animals. Dogs were different than horses or milk cows. Cows and horses were more useful and had to be cared for a little more than dogs, who were useful but didn't pull carriages or provide milk and cheese for the family to eat. At least that's what his dad always said. But he thought dogs were equally important. Maybe not to all the farmers, but definitely to him. He heard them before he saw them. He heard them before he saw them. Little whines and grunts that made him smile. We have 8 puppies right now that are ready to go, Obi said. 2 are already spoken for. There's 4 boys and 2 girls. They're in the second stall. Buddy couldn't help but peering over the top of the first stall. The mama dog there was lying on her side, a bunch of squirming puppies, nursing as she patiently waited. He didn't see how many since he was only walking past, but he could tell right off that they were too young to take away from their mother. He leaned over the second stall's door and laughed as one of the puppies let out a bark. Buddy thought the pup meant it to sound ferocious, but it was funny and cute. Hi, baby, Buddy said on a low, soft voice. He reached out a hand, but the puppy backed away. By now, they were all gathering around wanting to see what was happening. Once the puppies saw so many people standing just outside their stall, they started barking and carrying on, something crazy. Their antics made Buddy laugh. It was like they were trying to show off in hopes they would be the one picked, even if they didn't know what it was for. Let me get that, Obi said. He reached in and unlatched the door. It swung open and eight wriggling, barking, prancing puppies tumbled out. Inside the stall, the tired mama dog gratefully laid her head down for a quick nap. Taking care of so many babies had to be hard work. Buddy plopped down right there on the hay. He was glad his mom wasn't with him. She would have fussed over such behavior. But Jonah just laughed as the puppies climbed on top of one another in rambunctious attempt to lick his face. Jonah chuckled once more. It's going to be hard to choose. They had talked on the way over about how sometimes an owner picks an animal, and sometimes the animal picks the owner. Right now, it looked like all the puppies wanted to go home with Buddy. The ones with the collars are already sold. Obi pointed to the two. One had already broken away from the pack of his brothers and sisters and was tugging on Jonah's pant leg. Definitely not the one he wanted to take home, even if the pup wasn't already spoken for. Buddy's mom would have a fit if the puppy pulled on her good church stockings. Which ones are the girls? Buddy asked. How can you tell the difference? Jonah asked. They all look the same. Buddy sucked in a deep breath, preparing to launch into how to tell the difference between boys and girls. But Jonah raised a hand to stop him. That's not what I mean. All the puppies look exactly the same. No spots or different colors. Obi took a step forward. Actually, the girls tend to be a little more territorial, while the boys are more affectionate, at least in my dealings with them. The longer Buddy sat there, the more the puppies lost interest. A few started to wander away. Some went back into the stall to plop down on their tired mother, while others sniffed around at whatever they could find. Hay, boots, and walls. One, however, settled down in Buddy's lap, as if it was made just for her or him. He wasn't sure, seeing as how he hadn't had a chance to look. But it seemed like a girl, despite what Gabe Allen had said about the boys being more affectionate. Buddy scratched the pup behind one ear, and the tiny beast let out a shuddering puppy sigh. She seemed more than content to simply sit there and enjoy him without so much as a whimper. I think you've been chosen. Jonah's voice was low and at Buddy's ear. Maybe. Buddy rubbed her ear between his fingers and contemplated names. But the only name that would come to mind was Jenna. He liked Jenna. He thought she was pretty, but would she appreciate having a dog named after her? Somehow he didn't think so, but the name persisted. Have you made your decision? Obi asked. I can give you more time if not. Buddy hated to disturb the puppy's snoring slumber, but he supposed Obi and Jonah had other things to do besides to stand around in a barn while he let his puppy sleep in his lap. His puppy. He looked down into the sweet face of the fuzzy puppy. She was the color of one of his mom's biscuits. Just before she pulled them out of the oven, and she was warm too. Jenna. It was perfect. It was the perfect name. So what if he named the puppy Jenna? She would probably never see the dog anyway, and it was a really good name. Or he could give her a nickname like the Amish like to do. Yeah, a nickname. To tell the girl Jenna from the puppy Jenna. Puppy Jenna. It was settled. That was the dog's name. His dog. Decision made. He scooped the puppy from his folded legs and handed her to Jonah. She's the one, he said, as he rose to his feet. Obi and Jonah shared a look. What? Buddy asked, wiping the straw from the seat of his pants. Just then, the puppy started to pee. Jonah held her away from him, as to not get any on his clothes. And what had been evident to them now became known to Buddy as well. Oh, puppy Jenna was a boy. PJ, as he became known on the ride home, pranced over to the fireplace and dragged a piece of wood out of the kindling box. No, puppy. Buddy tried to take the stick from the dog, but PJ pulled back, growling. As a game of tug-of-war started. Puppy, Buddy admonished. Mom picked that moment to walk into the room. She took one look at the puppy and shook her head. Buddy hadn't thought it a big deal. He wanted a puppy, so he went and got one. But when he had arrived back home with the beast, his mother got mad, real mad. She accused Buddy of going behind her back and sneaking off with Jonah to get this puppy without further consulting her. Thankfully, Jonah had stayed behind and talked to Mom with him. Buddy wasn't sure if it was Jonah's steady presence or his dad's eventual interference that caused her to drop her arguments. Whatever it was, she stopped fussing outright, but made disapproving noises every time she saw the dog. Still was. Jonah promised that it was only a matter of time before their mother fell in love with the dog, just as he had. But Buddy wasn't so sure. His mother wasn't the lovey kind. Now why did Jenna's face pop into his mind? But suddenly he wanted to know if she was the lovey kind, if her mother was loving that way, or her grandmother. If only he could talk to her. It was one of the many things he would ask her. Buddy scooped up the dog and plopped him into his lap, belly side up, where he could scratch him. It seemed to calm him down most times. Buddy had spent a lot of time rubbing his belly in the 2 days that he'd had him. In those 2 days, he had also learned that Jennifer Abigail Burkhart had moved to Wells Landing from Kansas. She had come with her mother and her grandmother to get a fresh start. No one had said from what, and since Buddy was was getting the information by listening in on conversations that he wasn't expected to participate in. He couldn't just ask, so he had waited to see if someone would eventually say. So far, no one had. He had also learned that Jenna was simple. He didn't know exactly what that meant. He had a feeling it was something like special when people said it. When people said it, they tend to shake their heads, sort of sad like. And then they said it was a shame, and talked about how pretty she was. That was something he could understand, because Jenna Burkhart was the prettiest girl he had ever seen. His mother gave the dog one last disapproving look, then went back into the kitchen where she and her sisters had gathered. They said they were getting a jump on canning, but since nothing had come in yet, but the strawberries, he had a feeling they just wanted to visit. That was okay with him. The longer they visited, the more he learned of things no one thought to tell him, like where the church service was each week, and that Jenna Burkhart was simple. This week wasn't a church week, but since the weather had turned good, he figured they'd go visiting somewhere. It was just what they did. Well, he and Prudy and his mother and father. Prudy was his younger sister. She had just started school the year before and was ready to take over Will's Landing. He had asked what it meant when his mother had said it. Was Prudy going to become mayor or something? But Mom had laughed a bit, patted him on the cheek, and said that it meant Prudy was a handful and would most likely be something big when she grew up. But he often wondered what that might be. She could be a mixture of she couldn't be a minister or a bishop, seeing as how all of them were men, and she wouldn't know if she was going to be a bishop's wife or the like until she was older and already married, since the church leaders were chosen by lot. The only thing he could think of was a teacher, but that didn't seem quite big enough, so he had settled himself to watching and seeing what his sister would be when she grew up. He didn't mean to wish her life away, but he could hardly wait to find out. "I'll do it," he heard Mom say, and he perked up to hear what it was. "That's good of you, Gert," one of his aunts said. He wasn't sure which one. He hadn't been listening close enough. Well, it's just the neighborly thing to do, since they just moved here and all. He could just imagine his mother in the kitchen washing a mess of strawberries, while another one of her sisters cut the green part off. Another sister would be slicing them and tossing them into a big cook pot. They had to be talking about Jenna and her family. They were the only ones who had recently moved to Wells Landing. Another of his aunts said something, but he couldn't make out the words. His mother's reply came to him crystal clear. We can take a picnic lunch since the weather's turned. A picnic lunch with Jenna? His heart flip-flopped in his chest. Just the idea of seeing her again made his breathing faster, and the thought of spending the afternoon with her, eating with her, it was more like a dream come true than a neighborly chore. Much more. You hear that, puppy? Buddy cuddled the dog close to his face and kissed him on the top of his little puppy head. We're going to have a picnic lunch with Jenna Burkhart. You are going to love her. It's the neighborly thing to do, Mom was saying. Someone had invited them to visit on Sunday. Mommy said Mommy wanted to go, but Mom wasn't so sure. Jenna had spent a near miserable week wondering when she would be able to see Buddy again. It didn't seem that she was going to make it into town anytime soon, so she could read about Down syndrome. So her only hope was to ask Buddy himself. Once the idea came to her, it seemed so natural. Why hadn't she thought about it before? He was the one person who would be able to tell her about his condition and what it meant. After all, she was the only one she knew who could. She was the only one she knew who could talk about what it was like to have a weakened brain. But the more she thought about it, the more she had no idea what she would say. If she asked Buddy what it meant to have Down syndrome, and he asked her about her brain, what was she supposed to tell him? I think they're being nosy. Mom sniffed in that way Jenna had heard before. It meant her mother was feeling prideful and hurt, despite all the preachings she had heard in her lifetime on the perils of pride. The Amish often fell short of their goal to remain humble. Some missed the mark more than others. We're all nosy, Charlotte. The best thing is to meet this head on. Go to the Millers for this picnic. You'll be able to find out just as much about them as they can about you. More if you're really clever. The Millers had invited them to a picnic? How many Millers were there in Wells Landing? Plenty, she was sure. But it had to be Buddy's family. Somehow she just knew it. And if they didn't go to this picnic Mom and Mommy were talking about, then Jenna would have to wait another week Another week until church to be able to talk to him, and she might not get to see him at all. What if he got sick and didn't make it to church that week? He surely wouldn't be at any singing. What would she do then? Jenna hopped to her feet and rushed into the living room where her mother and grandmother sat. The Millers? She asked. Her mother shot her a strange look. Yeah. She turned back to the crocheting she had in her lap. Soon it would be too warm to work on, and Jenna knew her mother liked to get as much done in the spring as she could. That way the things she had made would be ready when fall came around again. Why do you want to know? Jenna tamped down her excitement. No reason. We met them at church. That part was true, even if the first part wasn't. I want to go. I think it will be fun. Her mommy smiled. See? Jenna knows that it's good to get out, to make friends. Jenna smiled and hoped she didn't look too excited. If they were going to be at the Miller's house, then surely Buddy would be there too. If it was the same family, she would be able to talk to him, find out more about him, what it meant to have Down syndrome, what it was like living in Wells Landing. Funnily enough, the more she thought about it, the more excited she was to find out more about him and living in Wells Landing. Nothing else seemed as important.
Chapter 4.
Chapter 4. Ivandale, get in here and get this dog. Buddy hustled into the kitchen to rescue PJ from his mom. Or maybe it was the other way around. He had heard people say that cats could tell which people didn't like them, and then they would bother the person out of spite. And they would bother that person out of spite. If that was really how it went, then PJ had to be at least half cat. It was no secret that Mom didn't want a dog around, especially not in the house. But Buddy brought him in every chance he got. The real problem came when the pup wriggled away from Buddy and went in search of the one person he could make squeal. Now, Mom's voice was firm. Yeah. Buddy picked up the wriggling puppy and hauled him outside. The whole while he kept his head down so his mom wouldn't see his grin. He wasn't trying to be disrespectful, but it was funny to him, and his mother didn't seem to smile enough these days. It had gotten worse after Jonah had married Sarah Yoder, though she would never admit it. Buddy knew that Mom didn't like Sarah. Buddy didn't know why. He liked Sarah a lot, almost too much, he thought at times. But Sarah had always been kind to him. It wasn't that people in Wells Landing were mean to him. Oh no, everyone in town was much too nice for that. Even Maddie Kaufman. Maddie was about the grumpiest person he knew, and she was still very kind to him. Maybe because her youngest son, Daniel, had a weak brain. Buddy didn't know if that was the best way to describe it. But Daniel didn't have Down syndrome like Buddy did. He was more like James, real. Though James was kicked in the head by an ornery milk cow instead of being born that way. James had been like everyone else until a couple of years ago. Maybe four or six. Buddy couldn't remember. He set PJ down in the yard and leaned back against the edge of the porch. The busy puppy immediately ran to the chicken coop and started barking at the chickens. They squawked and flapped their wings from safely inside the wire cage. Buddy was on his feet in an instant. He loved the soft, sweet dog, but he was starting to get tired. Not of the dog, just in general, of trying to keep him out of trouble. He wondered if his mother ever felt that way about Prudy. "Stop," he hollered. He took his hat from his head and shooed the pup away from the chickens. It took 3 times, but PJ gave up barking at the chickens and instead started towards the cow pond at the edge of the woods. Buddy plopped his hat back on and shook his head at his dog. He loved the beast, PJ. He loved the beast. PJ had chosen him, just like they said. But sometimes Buddy wondered if his dog had a weak brain. He learned, but it took time, and Buddy had to constantly be watching him to keep him out of mischief. Never before had he thought so much about weak brains and who in Wells Landing had one. Maybe because it had never come up before, not since Jenna Burkhart, with the dog safely chasing wild ducks around the small body of water in the pasture. Buddy headed back inside. He was supposed to be cleaning out his closet and seeing if he had anything that his mom needed to mend. She didn't trust him to bring those things to her when he knows them, so she made him do this twice a year. Once in the fall and once in the spring. It was May in Oklahoma, and most around here considered it to be summer, even though there were still a couple of weeks before summer actually started. It was warm enough to be early summer, according to the thermostat outside the barn. The temperatures were reaching toward the 90s, but he was but he was spring cleaning his closet for Mom. He had tried to talk her out of making him do it this year, but she had insisted. He wanted his independence almost more than he wanted anything. But he knew because Jonah had explained it to him. He needed to be choosy about the things he dug in his heels over. Dug in his heels. That was another one of those sayings that almost meant what it really said, but not quite. It meant stand firm, and he was going to do that soon. Just not over cleaning his closet. He let himself back into the house. At the last minute, he caught the screen door and closed it slowly, careful not to let it slam. His mom hated that. Buddy sort of liked the sound, but it bothered Mom. If he was going to prove to her that he was growing up almost a man, then he had to remember things like not slamming the screen door. I'm not sure what her problem is. Mom was saying as he turned to go upstairs to his room. He didn't know why, but his feet stopped. He paused, wanting to hear what she said next, and to whom she was saying it. She doesn't have a problem, Mom. His sister Hannah. Hannah had just had a baby and liked to come over when she could to let the baby visit with its gross eldra. As far as Buddy could see, Hannah did much more visiting than the baby, but when he had said as much, both his mom and his sister had fussed at him. He lingered there at the bottom of the stairs and listened for what they would say next. He wanted to visit with his little niece, but he didn't think Hannah would let him hold her. She rarely did. And when she did say it was okay, she made him wash his hands clear up to his elbows and use the smelly sanitizer to kill all germs. Buddy didn't like the sanitizer. He didn't like how it made his hands sticky or how it smelled. He wanted to hold the baby, but most times he didn't think it was worth all the trouble she put him through. Fancy Amish. That's what everyone said about Hannah, with her fancy house and fancy clock in the front room. She and her husband had fancy tastes, but he didn't see what was wrong with all that. But he sure hated the sanitizer. Call it what you will, Mom was saying. But the girl isn't normal. She's weak in the brain. The words stuck Buddy's feet to the floor. Jenna. They were talking about Jennifer Abigail Burkhart. Jenna wasn't weak in the brain. She had a weak brain. It was almost the same thing, but different. weakened brain made it seem like she couldn't make good decisions or wasn't smart. But a weakened brain seemed to say to him that she might take a little longer to get to where she needed to be in making a decision. But give her enough time and she would get there. Yeah, he liked a weakened brain a lot better. She isn't soft in the head, Hannah said. Apparently his sister agreed with him. She just has brain damage from a swimming accident. Who told you that? He could almost hear his sister's shrug. Even if he couldn't see her, he had seen it enough times to picture it in his head without any help. Maybe Sadie Kaufman? Sadie Hine, Hannah corrected. His mother made the harumphing sound that meant she either didn't like something or she didn't agree with it. Married to a Mennonite. Buddy didn't know why his mother disapproved of Mennonites so much. She claimed she didn't, but it sure seemed that way to him. She hated that Sadie Kaufman had gone and married up with a Mennonite. Buddy didn't care. Hadn't they all been Amish at one time? Or maybe they had all been Mennonites? Anyway, there had been a time when they had all believed the same thing. So why were they so far apart these days? He hadn't understand. Besides, he liked Sadie. She was always nice to him. It was probably because of her brother Daniel, and she understood that not everyone had a brain that worked like everyone else's. Daniel's didn't. He went to special school and everything. Buddy hadn't gone to special school. He'd just taken a little longer to finish up. Or maybe Sadie didn't believe that just because a person's brain didn't work like everyone else's, that they should be treated any differently. But he liked Sadie. She had married a Mennonite man by the name of Ezra Hine. Buddy supposed that it didn't have anything to do with being Mennonite. But Ezra owned an exotic animal ranch between Taylor Creek and Wells Landing. He had all sorts of animals there. Bison. Those were what people mistakenly called buffalo, but they were really bison. Deer, elk, and all sorts of cattle. Year before last, he had a few camels, but when Titus Lambert came home from prison, Ezra had sold him the camels so he could milk them. Buddy thought that was weird, but amazing. He had never thought about milking anything but a cow or a goat, but he supposed any animal who gave birth to live young could produce milk and therefore be milked. He had just never thought about it much before then. Hannah ignored their mother's mention of Mennonites and continued. She was perfectly normal up until then. I heard it was a terrible tragedy for their family. Jenna being an only child and all. Buddy held his breath as his mother asked, as his mother tisked. Sometimes God's will is hard to understand. He didn't know what to think about that, so he paused his thoughts and simply listened to them talk. There had been a time when Jenna's brain had worked just fine, but then she had an accident and it stopped working the same. Like James Real, but not like him. Buddy had been born with his brain working the way it did. Him and Daniel Kaufman. Jenna's family had been aggravated over her change and had pressed on until Jenna's father died. They'd continued to live in Yoder until a few weeks ago, when they came south to Wells Landing. Hannah didn't say why Jenna and her family moved to Wells Landing, or why they had chosen Wells Landing over all the other places they could have moved. Buddy hadn't heard anyone say that they were kin to the Burkharts. Had it simply been part of God's plan that they moved to where he lived? He smiled at the thought. He loved when God's plan came to light. It was like a ray of sunshine burning through a rain cloud. Things were dim and cloudy, then all of a sudden, everything was clear. Yes, God's plan. He liked it. He liked it a lot. What are you doing? And Jonathan appeared at the top of the stairs, staring at Buddy as if he had forgotten where he lived. Buddy sputtered. "I'm cleaning my closet." Jonathan shook his head. "You can't clean your closet if you're standing at the bottom of the stairs." "Can too." Buddy gave a firm nod. Daring Jonathan to say different. "Fine." Jonathan made his way down the stairs and brushed past Buddy. "Don't go into the kitchen unless you want to have. Don't go in the kitchen unless you want to have to use the sanitizer. Hannah is in there with the baby." Jonathan turned around and headed toward the front door. "Where are you going?" Buddy asked. "Susanna's," Jonathan mumbled, then let himself out. The screen door slammed behind him with a satisfying whack. Buddy smiled and headed up the stairs. Two things were plainly visible. Jonathan liked the sound of the screen door slamming too, and he hated the smell of the sanitizer just as much as Buddy did. He couldn't get the thought out of his head, not for the rest of the day, nor all day Saturday. Even Sunday morning, when he first woke up, God's plan was floating through his thoughts. He and Jenna had met because God had wanted them to, and now she was coming over for a picnic. Sunday afternoon, visiting Sunday afternoon visiting could last all day. He might get to spend the entire day with Jenna. So he had already gotten himself a dog. He still had room in his life for a girlfriend. Maybe anyway. Not that he and Jenna could be boyfriend and girlfriend. Jonah would say that he was getting way ahead of himself. But out of all the girls and women in Wells Landing, the one most likely to be his girlfriend was Jenna Burkhart. Jennifer Abigail Burkhart. And he was going to spend time with her today. He got up and made his bed as quickly as he could. Now that Jonah and Sarah were in their own house, Buddy had a room all to himself. The first few nights he had stayed there all by himself. He had hated it, but it had been a little over a year, and he had gotten used to it. A sure sign that a person could get used to almost anything if they tried hard enough. Aaron and Jonathan still shared a bedroom, but it wouldn't be long until Aaron moved out. Once he finally married Mary Ebersole, then Jonathan would find a bride for himself and take over the farm the way the youngest sons of Amish families were prone to do. Mom and Dad would move into the what? Mom and Dad would move into the Doddle house, and Buddy would live there in his room forever with PJ. Maybe Jonathan wouldn't have the same rules as mom and he. Maybe Jonathan wouldn't have the same rules as Mom, and he would allow PJ to sleep at the foot of Buddy's bed. It was almost the cheeriest thought he had. So he changed into his clothes and went into the bathroom to brush his teeth. Jenna, yes, that was a much better thought than living with Jonathan until Jesus came back. Not that he didn't love Jonathan, he did, but there were some things that didn't put joy in a person's heart. That was one of them. But not Jenna. He peered into the mirror, and her name came to mind, and he thought he saw a light gleam in his eyes. Just the thought of her changed him. That was joy, big joy. And if the thought of her gave him that much joy, he should make sure he looked extra nice for the day. He glanced down at his shirt. There was a stain on the front, sort of greenish and long, probably mustard that Mom didn't get out. It seemed to Buddy that Mom got the mustard stains out of Aaron's shirts, but not Buddy's, Jonathan's too. Neither one of his younger brothers went around with stains on their shirts, and Jonah hadn't either, not even when he lived at home and shared a room with Buddy. He shook his head at himself. He would have to be more careful with his laundry. And make sure he told Mom that he wanted her to take better care of stains when they popped up on his shirts and such. Buddy hustled across the hall, unbuttoning his shirt as he went. He would have to find a better shirt, one without stains on it. He couldn't meet with Jenna with food stains on his clothes. It took 3 tries, but he found a shirt that had no stains. Probably because it was a dark, dark blue. It was all right, though. His pants were the kind that looked like blue jeans, but were really barn door pants with matching suspenders attached. The two looked good together. "Buddy," Mom called from downstairs. "Yeah?" "Breakfast is ready. Come eat." He looked at himself in the bathroom mirror once again. Thankfully, he had shaved the day before, so he didn't have to do that again today. Sometimes he could go 3 whole days without even thinking about shaving. But his hair, he had what his mother called a cowlick. He wasn't sure what that meant, except that he had a lock of hair that went an entirely different direction than all the other hair on his head. This, of course, made it stand straight up in the air. Usually he was wearing a hat and that covered it. But if Jenna came into the house and they sat down and talked like courting couples did, he would have to take off his hat, and she would laugh at the spot where the cow had licked his hair. He had asked his mom if she could get the same cow to lick his hair back into the direction that went, but she had only smiled at him and patted his cheek. She told him the lock of hair was just another part of what made him so special, but Buddy didn't want to be special. He wet his comb and tried to make the spot lie down. He smoothed it flat, but as soon as he removed the comb, it sprung back into its rebellious place. He did it three more times before Mom called from downstairs. "Buddy, get down here." "Yes, Mom." But he couldn't go down looking like this. Coming. But that wasn't the truth. He opened the medicine cabinet and searched for something to tame his hair into place. But aside from an extra tube of toothpaste and everyone who used that bathroom in the morning's deodorant, there was only a bottle of baby lotion. Wait, didn't girls use that to smooth their hair to keep it in place? And that was why girls always smell like babies even if they didn't have one? That would do the trick. He squeezed out a big glob of the pink lotion and coated his cowlick hair with it. Maybe he had gotten too much. He wiped his hand on the hand towel next to the sink and wiped what he couldn't get off on the seat of his pants. "Buddy, everyone is waiting for you." Everyone but Dad, he thought. If his dad were hungry, he would be the one coming up the stairs after him, and not his mom. "Just a minute," Buddy said, searching for some excuse as to what he was doing without giving himself away. "I woke up with a bellyache." And now he was lying. "Are you all right?" His mother's voice went from annoyed to worried in a single instant. "I am. Don't come up. I may be here for a while." I may be here a while. That part wasn't exactly a lie. He tried to comb through the mess of lotion on his hair, and all it did was slightly weigh down the sprig of hair and make little pink trenches in it. Now, instead of sticking straight up, it sort of waved when he nodded his head. He nodded to try it out. Nope, he couldn't have that. It was all or nothing. He either needed to get it to lie down or allow it to stand up. Though the last one wasn't something he would be able to accept either. "We're starting without you," Mom said. "Everyone else needs to eat. Come down when you feel better." "I will." He combed it down again. This time, the lotion caked in his comb, and the lotion caked in his comb, and the sprig of hair shot upward, as if reaching for the ceiling. It wasn't going to lie down. He had never been able to get it to lie down before. Maybe he should have thought about this yesterday or the day before, but he had been too busy thinking about God's plan for them all. He supposed that a person could argue that his strange hair was part of God's plan for him, but he wasn't entirely convinced that God planned those sorts of things. He might know when a sparrow fell from the sky, but Buddy had a feeling cowlicks were an entirely different matter. Maybe there was something in one of the drawers. He opened the one on the left and rifled through it. Prudy's extra hair accessories, a pair of scissors, and a shower cap. The drawer on the right wasn't much better. He wasn't sure when was the last time he looked in there. Maybe one of her bobby pins, but that would show. Even more than the blob of lotion that was spread there. Only one thing to do. If it wouldn't lie down, it was going to have to go. Buddy picked up the scissors and made one concise snip.